Hey guys, welcome back to Games of War. Happy Halloween to everyone, and what better topic for a video for today's episode than horror games. This is a perfect time to talk about some underrated, underloved horror games that are some of my personal favorites. Now, I'm not going to talk about the big three, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Fatal Frame, because those are well-known horror games. They were talked about everywhere. They're constantly brought up when talking about survival horror or horror games. Resident Evil invented the genre, so there's tons of information out there about those. I'm more concerned about those ones that slipped under the radar that just need some more love. Now, I absolutely do love Resident Evil, and Silent Hill is my favorite series of all time when it comes to horror. This first game introduced me to a kind of horror that I didn't know existed. Now, the Resident Evil was like campy, B-grade horror action. Silent Hill was the psychological, twisted, and I absolutely fell in love with this game. This is a true classic. If you haven't played it, check it out. But I do want to talk about a couple of games in the Silent Hill series, Homecoming and Downpour, because these are two entries that most people shit on. And I don't know if they've played them or not, or they just heard people shit on them because they're not done by Team Silent. But these are two great games in the Silent Hill series, in my opinion. Homecoming was the first game that I actually understood the story from beginning to end. There was no confusion, there was no like second guessing or scratching your head or like crazy ass puzzles you couldn't solve. It was just a good horror game, good atmosphere. The combat was probably the best it's ever been in the series. And I know the focus of the Silent Hill series is not combat. They're supposed to be weak and underpowered because that's not the focus of the game, but in this you play as a character who was in the Marines, and he is trained and he's a tough guy, so the real-time wounds is amazing. When you slash and hack on these enemies, you're going to see like real-time wounds appear and bleed in real time, and it's just amazing. Now, the combat is the best in Homecoming. I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was a great entry in the series, and I do not get the hate that Homecoming receives. Same thing with Downpour, to a lesser extent. I didn't like Downpour as much as Homecoming, but it was still really cool. It had that atmosphere, it had the real gloomy environments, we had the cool main character who's an ex-convict. I really enjoyed Downpour as well. The rain pouring down was real atmospheric and symbolic of enemies appearing, and they're both great games. I know they're not on the same level as the original Silent Hill games done by Team Silent. In actuality, Silent Hill 4 is as far away from the Silent Hill series as these are in terms of just feeling like a Silent Hill game, but Silent Hill 4 gets a pass because it's done by Team Silent, although it does get more shit than the other games. But Silent Hill 4 The Room was definitely the odd duck, but these are great games, so don't let the bad words of mouth dissuade you from playing these excellent games if you haven't tried them. Now, Fatal Frame is probably the lesser known of the big three, and I've got to say, if you're going to play the first two, definitely get the Xbox versions. They look better, they sound better, they play better. These are great entries in the series, made even better on Xbox. The third one is only available on the PS2, so you have no choice on that one. And then the newest one was a Wii U only download game, so definitely if you have the choice, get the first two on the Xbox. And I also want to give special mention to a series that I think should be and could have been up there with the big three in terms of horror. This could have been one of the big names in the horror franchise, and it is to some people, but to me it absolutely is. When the first Dead Space came out, I don't care what anybody says, this game blew me away, man. This was an amazing game. It was scary, it was tense, it had a beautiful sci-fi story, the pacing was amazing, the necromorphs were a badass group of enemies, the combat was amazing, shooting enemies and dismembering them and shooting off their limbs and arms and legs and all kinds of badass guns, and it was so atmospheric and the graphics were so well done, that brutal stomp and the corpses rolling all over the ships. Dead Space 1 came out and blew everyone away. It was amazing. It deserves to be at the top of the horror list. Dead Space 2 brought everything back and continued the story as just an amazing sequel. It added some online play and some other things that I didn't really care, but this was an amazing sequel. The story was fleshed out, the sprawl, the station out in space, more Isaac Clarke. They gave Isaac Clarke a voice. In the first one, he was kind of like the silent protagonist. This game here is what fucking flushed everything down the toilet. And to be honest with you, I get the complaints. It's definitely the weakest of the three. I love the idea of Tal Batanis being like this frozen planet, but they just changed too much shit. I don't know what the hell they were trying to do. Appeal to who? Appeal to who? Their audience loved these two. They took this and made most of it take place in the daylight. They added co-op and they made it just this stupid shit in the daylight, and they did this weapon crafting system, which admittedly, crafting the weapons and mixing and matching parts and creating different weapon types was cool, but they just changed so much shit that just wasn't for the best. I don't know what they were thinking. But that being said, it wasn't as bad a game to just kill off the franchise. It's like this game came out and didn't sell well, so they're like, oh no, Dead Space 3 didn't sell well, let's just kill the whole fucking series. Done. Didn't meet sales expectations, everybody hates it, let's fucking ruin the whole series. And now recently the development team Visceral was shut down by EA, which I was just like, oh no, come on, are we not going to see a Dead Space? Granted, the third one was not that great, but it didn't deserve to kill the fucking franchise, man. It drives me crazy because I want my Dead Space 4, damn it. So the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube era was such a fantastic time to be a fan of survival horror or horror games. There was no shortage of amazing games coming out, and one of my favorite series that has been long forgotten. I would love to see a new game in this series, but I don't think we ever will. This was back when Midway was actually on fire, making great games. The Suffering. This is a badass action horror series. Tons of language, tons of violence, over-the-top violence. This series sees you play as a man named Torque who has been sent to prison for the murder of his wife and children. Now, Torque claims he's innocent, but he blacked out and he doesn't remember what happened. All that we know now is that his family and 2 children are murdered, and upon arriving at this penitentiary, which is a badass setting for a horror game, I loved the idea of him being in prison. It's on an island, so it kind of reminds me of Alcatraz. I've always loved Alcatraz. So this is a great setup. As soon as Torque arrives at this prison, there's an earthquake, and then the island is invaded by a supernatural threat of monsters and all kinds of shit going down. Now, what I love about this game is that playing as Torque, not only are you trying to escape this prison alive and combat these horrible monsters, but your conflicting demons within are also at the forefront of the story. This guy is conflicted as hell. His family and his wife are dead. You know, did he murder them? He doesn't know. He's torn with guilt if he did it, but he misses them. The conflict inside of him is very real, and that really plays into the gameplay. There's a morality system at work in here, and throughout the game there's different situations where you can make different choices, whether you can save people or just have no remorse and kill them or help people out. These choices that you make factor into the storyline and whether you killed your family or not. So it's kind of up to you how you play the game. This game also kicks ass to me personally from being one of the few games that you can switch between third and first person and enjoy the game just as much either or. The third person character model doesn't look awkward. Like a lot of games that are in first person, if you switch to third person, it just seems off. It seems very weird. Movement seems stiff. This game plays great in first or third person. Absolutely love that. The game oozes atmosphere. This prison is an amazing setting for a horror game. It's dark, it's scary, it's dimly lit. There's flickering lights. You hear the distant sounds of monsters crawling through the vents and different inmates screaming for their lives and murder going on next to you, and you can hear people screaming for their lives and monsters slashing away. Fantastic visuals and sound cues. Really immerse you in this game, this series. Torque's a badass character. As you start hacking away and killing enemies, you'll see blood start to appear, and a blood-soaked shirt, blood on his pants, all kinds of cool different guns and shivs and melee weapons, shotguns. You can morph into this badass creature for a special move, which brings us to another aspect that I really dug about this game. All of the creatures in this game, first of all, they're designed by the Stan Winston Studios, who did like Alien and a lot of other great creatures. All of the creatures in this game are based on forms of execution that take place at this island. So you've got slashers, it's based on like decapitation. The marksman monsters represent a firing squad. You've got these monsters that kind of walk around and shimmy around on syringes, and that kind of represents lethal injection. All of the monsters are based on a form of capital punishment, and I thought that was a really cool gameplay element, really added a cool touch to the monsters. This series is amazing. It's scary as hell. It is immersive. It had me glued to the TV. I had to find out what the hell happened to his family. I really felt for Torque, and I really enjoyed going through the environments, and the gunplay is great. The hit detection is spot on. Everything about the Suffering games kick ass. I would love to see another entry in this series on the PS4 with some great graphics. If you're looking for a game to play this October, this Halloween, this scary season, look no further than the Suffering. These games are fantastic. Alright guys, next up we've got the Condemned series of games, and this is an amazing, dark, and brutal, twisted action series, almost, horror series. And I remember the first Condemned so vividly, and it's hard to believe it's been like 11 years since I played this first. I mean, so much time has gone by, and it's gone by so fast. But I had the original Condemned, and I had Cameo before I even had a 360. I remember I refused to play this shit until I got an HD TV, and back in 2006, HD TVs were still expensive as hell. So that year for Christmas, I got an HD TV and a 360, but I had Condemned and Cameo like in October or something, and for the 2 months I was just staring at the back of these cases saying, my god, can games look this good? This shit looks insane. When I got that Christmas morning, I played Condemned right away, and I was blown away by how just realistic and brutal, and it was really shiny. I remember it being really shiny, those early games. But you play as Ethan Thomas, who's like a crime scene unit investigator for the FBI. You arrive on the scene tracking this serial killer matchmaker who has been like murdering people and setting them up in like twisted poses with mannequins, weird shit like that. And as you're looking around the crime scene, you get like ambushed, knocked out. You wake up, your gun's been stolen, and the officers that were with you are murdered, and you're framed for this murder, and you're on the run in this dark, twisted, decaying metro city. Thankfully, your partner Rosa back at the forensics lab still has your back, so she's contact with you constantly on your phone, and you're walking through these like abandoned buildings and rundown alleys and shit, and these crazy like drug addict, hopped up crazy bastards are jumping out and like grunting and like swinging these pipes and poles at you and shit, and it's this brutal melee combat. It was not so much focused on gunplay. It's first person, but the gunplay is very minimal. The emphasis is on like brutal hand-to-hand and brutal melee combat, and swinging that lead pipe and cracking skulls and shit is just intense. And what's cool about this game, because if it was just combat, it might get a little old because it's all so dark and decrepit, and it is scary for sure. These guys jumping out of nowhere and trying to bash your skull in. You've got Rosa who calls in your cell phone, and when you examine certain scenes, you can like take pictures of like fingerprints and blood and send her the pictures, and she analyzes them back at the forensics lab, and you can kind of do like fingerprint analysis and blood splatters and footprints and shit like that. And it's really cool doing these little investigations and piecing together clues on what happened as you make your way to clear your name, tracking down these serial killers that are killing other killers, and people are dying everywhere. And it's just a dark and twisted action game that's very scary, very atmospheric. I absolutely loved this introduction into the next generation of gaming from Condemned. It was scary, it was intense. I loved the serial killer theme and storyline. A fantastic game. Now the sequel came out, I think a year or two later. Now the second game was pretty cool. I didn't like it as much as the first, but it was still a great game. You play as Ethan Thomas once again, who's now retired from the force, and he's now turned into like this alcoholic, just a drunken piece of shit, really. The gameplay is improved. It's got like more emphasis on melee combat, where each trigger controls a hand, so you're able to do like some pretty cool combos and some got QTE finishes. And you've got some environmental kills where you can bash people's heads into like TVs and shit. The storyline I didn't quite like as much. There's like this dark ooze taking over the city and shit. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first game. Still a great game, very dark. The combat is definitely expanded. I just didn't like the atmosphere in terms of the storyline when compared to like this dark, gritty original serial killer tale. But overall, still a great game. The Condemned series, both games are fantastic to play on like Halloween or the month of October. They're creepy, they're very dark, they're very violent and scary. Check this series out if you haven't played it. They're both amazing games. Next up, we've got Cold Fear, and this was a pretty big deal when this first came out. I remember them, Ubisoft, it was their first horror game, and they were really pouring a lot of resources into this, and it was getting pretty hyped up. I absolutely loved the setting. I'm such a sucker for like stuff out at sea, like abandoned ocean liners or abandoned ships, and it's just atmosphere of the water outside and be desolate and out in the middle of nowhere. Totally had me at the word go with this one. I loved the atmosphere. This game had the misfortune of coming out around the same time as Resident Evil 4, which was like a godsend for everyone. Everybody was on Resident Evil's nuts, and this got unfairly compared to that because it does a few things that aren't the norm, and it does a few things that could have been better. But in terms of atmosphere, playing as this Coast Guard Tom Hansen, who is sent and dispatched out to this ocean liner that's out in the middle of the ocean, just abandoned adrift. You arrive on this ship and something is immediately wrong. There's a virus on board that has turned the crew members into this, like, they call them exos in the game, and they're like these mutant zombie-like creatures that can only be killed with headshots. So you can shoot them in the arms, shoot them in the legs, slow them down, but it's not going to kill them unless you fire off that headshot. I got to pay special attention to the animation and the effects that they did with the rolling of the ship. I think I got seasick a few times playing this. It's been a while, but I remember getting kind of queasy because they did the animation of the rocking of the boat so effectively, and shit just like moves around in the boat with the waves, and you can kind of miss things that you're shooting at due to the motion of the waves and shit. And it's really well done. The ship is dark and derelict, and it is an amazing graphical achievement back then. I remember the ship just being so realistic with the animation and sliding over the ship and the waves crashing over. A really cool horror game. The over-the-shoulder aiming from Resident Evil is in this, and you can actually shoot and move. Some of the things I remember that they did wrong was that there was no map. Man, that's a real big problem for me. I know critics shit on that part, but not having a map, so you really have to memorize like where you're going or kind of draw one up yourself, because it just really unintuitive not having a map of where you've explored and where you got to come back to, and it makes backtracking a pain in the ass, and it really was a big problem. Another problem was there was no inventory, man. It was just like really weird to not have a proper inventory system. You couldn't store like health packs. You just like found something and refilled your life on the spot. If you were full, it would just do nothing. You couldn't hold on to it for later. So some inventory issues, and the map was an issue. But if you look past that, it's got some great graphics, great production value. They put a lot of effort into this. The setting is amazing. The ship works great. The second half of the game takes you off of the ship, and that kind of settled into more familiar survival horror territory. But this was an admirable first job. It sold for shit. It didn't do well at all. They lost a lot of money on it, which is sad because had this come out not near Resident Evil 4, or maybe before it, I think it would have done really well. It was a great first entry, and I really liked Cold Fear. Very underrated if you ask me. Now next up, we've got the D series, and I want to talk about two games in this series specifically that I liked the most. Now, I enjoyed D, the first one, don't get me wrong, but Enemy Zero and D2 really blew me away. Now, Enemy Zero on the Saturn's got a really interesting story. This was supposed to be like a PlayStation exclusive, and Sony pissed off the developers of the game somehow, didn't ship enough pre-orders of the previous game or something, and they shifted development to the Saturn, but nobody knew until this big event day, and they showed a new trailer for the game, and then all of a sudden the PlayStation logo was supposed to come up at the end, and it kind of morphed into a Saturn logo, which kind of made it a Saturn exclusive without telling anybody. That takes some balls to do that. Enemy Zero is a monster of a game. I think it's 4 discs. I remember getting this back in the day and just falling in love with this. Now, I remember sitting there in the dark with my notepad and scribbling out a map as I made my way through these corridors of this ship, the Aki, which is like a biological research vessel. And in the beginning, Laura Lewis, who is the main protagonist in all of these games, wakes up from cryogenic hypersleep, and she is waken up by an explosion, and she's like, what the hell is going on? And she gets on the video phone and talks to one of her crewmates, Parker, and as they're talking and shit, he like hears something, he looks off to the side, and then he's slaughtered on call while she's on call, and there's blood flying everywhere, and he's murdered. And then Laura steps out into the corridors and begins to find what's wrong. And this game is amazing graphically. I remember being so immersed in this first person, like walking through these corridors. And the main hook of this game is that these enemies, it's an invisible enemy that you don't see. And that's one thing to have like a monster that makes an appearance and you see, oh shit, it's a scary looking monster. But the things you don't see, to me, can be just as scary, if not more so. And it operates on this sound, and I had the Saturn connected to like a surround sound system back then. It was like an old thing with 2 speakers, and it did pretty good. And I remember hearing these pings in the distance as you were getting closer to this monster, and it would start pinging, and you get closer. I was sweating playing this game. You got to charge up your gun for this one shot, and if you miss, you have to charge the gun over, and it's just an intense way of delivering gameplay and combat. The graphics were really good. The cinemas were cool. Really good voice acting. I just had this certain atmosphere, this silent atmosphere out in space that I just could not get enough of. It blew me away. It made me happy to own a Saturn back in the day. Enemy Zero is an amazing horror game, very scary, tense, and nail-biting. Now, D2 completely blew me away. Now, this was supposed to be like a game for the 3DO M2, and like 50% done, and they kind of canceled the M2, and it got shifted over to Dreamcast. And in this game, you play as Laura once again, and you're on a plane, and you're flying over the Canadian wilderness, and like all of a sudden, like the plane gets attempted to be overtaken by like this terrorist group. There's like this guy chanting, this like crazy cult guy, and the guy that's sitting next to you is like a member of the FBI, it turns out, and he kind of attempts to thwart the terrorist attack, and then the plane is struck by a meteor, and you crash down to the white Canadian wilderness. Now you wake up and you're being tended to by this girl, Kimberly, who was another passenger, another survivor on the plane, and she's like talking to you, and everything's, oh, I've been out for 10 days, what's going on, what happened? And you're talking about what's happened, and all of a sudden this guy like stumbles in the cabin, and he starts talking. You can tell something's not right, and he just kind of morphs into this like giant plant creature. Immediately when I'm playing this game, I'm thinking of that movie, Stephen King's Dreamcatcher. It just reminded me of that for some reason. So you fight this guy, it's like this plant form, and if you kill him, you set off into this Canadian wilderness to find out like there's more survivors, what the hell's going on, where you're at. And this game combines like a mixture of gameplay styles. So when you're exploring this Canadian wilderness, you're in third person, and you're wandering through this snow and this beautiful environment. And then when you go into the combat, it goes into a first-person perspective. It's like a first-person shooter, but you can't move. You can only aim. So you're like aiming and shooting enemies and taking them out. And when you kill the enemies, you get experience points you can use to level Laura up. And you get a submachine gun that's unlimited ammo. You always have that. And you've got a hunting rifle that you can use to shoot animals like far off distances. You can kind of zoom in, scope up, and you can shoot these animals to heal your life. So the game mixes RPG elements, action gameplay, first-person gunplay, and the reviews kind of bitched about the gameplay being sloppy and the parts didn't make sense and the execution fell flat. but I really enjoyed the storyline. I enjoyed the different gameplay styles. I'd never played anything like it. I really enjoyed the detailed story and the voice acting. It just had an odd feel to it. It was Dreamcast, so it was kind of had that arcadey look to it, but it was very beautiful. Travel on the snowmobile was awesome. When you get the snowmobile, it kind of whipping through the Canadian wilderness, and I really enjoyed the combat. The enemies were all really cool, over-the-top grotesque violence and like blood squirting out and green from the plants, and overall it was just a great game. I absolutely loved D2. I haven't played it in a while, so I think tomorrow when it's Halloween, turn the lights off, and I think I'm going to play some D2 because it's been too long. A fantastic game. Now, outside of the big three, I'd say the next series that has the most recognition is probably the Clocktower series, aside from D. An amazing series that I've talked about many times and throughout many videos. If you're into horror games, point and click, moving on to a more traditional game, definitely check out the Clocktower series. And then I've talked about these spin-off countlessly in countless videos. Haunting Ground. This was a amazing success story for me personally. When this came out, it got such bad reviews, but I loved the game so much I couldn't understand why these reviewers were shitting on this game. And it's really satisfying to see that this game is now getting the recognition it's due. People talk about it, they celebrate it, it's gone up in price, and it's recognized for the great game that it is. Haunting Ground I've talked about many times before, but definitely check out the Clocktower series if you haven't. I also want to briefly mention Rule of Rose, and this has become one of those games that a lot of people talk about just because it's gotten rare and expensive, but I've talked about this game multiple times in past videos. It's a really great survival horror game focusing on creepy ass children in orphanages. It's a great game. I loved it when it first came out. I picked it up day one, and the reviews for this, once again, were not that great. I'm not sure why exactly it's gotten so expensive. I've talked about it many times before, so if you are into survival horror and you can find a copy of this in the cheap somehow, definitely pick it up. Rule of Rose is great. I hope you guys have enjoyed taking a look at some of my favorite lesser known horror games. Trust me guys, I wanted to go all out and do like an hour episode of full-blown survival horror buyer's guide. That is coming in the near future, I promise you that, because I got a lot more games I want to talk about. I just wanted to put together something small for you guys so you had something on Halloween to enjoy. If there's a game that you haven't played before or heard of, I hope you're able to find it and try it out. If you're going out for Halloween or going to a party, I hope you stay safe. I hope you guys enjoy this holiday. One of my favorite holidays for sure, and we've got Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up, so it's a happy time. Great games coming out all around. Thank you guys for watching. As always, Games of War is absolutely nothing without you.